When a humble maid recognizes, in an old photograph inside the mansion where she works, the son she believed had died in a fire 20 years ago, the secret that upholds one of the nation's most powerful families begins to crumble, proving that a mother's love can set even the mightiest empire ablaze. Before we continue, subscribe now to our channel to receive everyday powerful stories that touch the heart. The iron gates of Harrington Manor opened with a reluctant groan, and Elena Vasquez stepped through carrying a bucket and a folded apron, the evening light glazing the long windows like quiet witnesses to lives she would never live, while somewhere beyond the hedges a fountain whispered names she did not know, and the gravel under her shoes crackled like distant thunder promising a storm. As portraits along the entrance hall watched her pass with oil-painted patience, their gilt frames catching, flecks of light like coins thrown into a wishing well, and the floral scent of polished wood mingled with old smoke from winters long extinguished, reminding her of the orphanage boiler that coughed heat on cold nights, the memory arriving uninvited and leaving a chill behind it, while a clock in the vestibule beat strict seconds into the hush of wealth, each tick a small verdict on how long she could pretend not to tremble, because work was work and rent was rent and grief was a bill nobody forgave, and still she felt the house leaning toward her as if hungry for a confession, the kind that begins with a key turning where it never should. The butler, Mr. Corbett, directed her to the west wing with a clipped nod, warning that the staircase to the third floor remained closed for renovations and family privacy. But the corridor there breathed a draft that smelled of paper and lavender and something older, and a door left on a cautious latch shivered as if resisting its own secrets, until a stray gust, not malicious, merely insistent, pushed it wide enough for conscience to hesitate. And Elena, who had survived alarms louder than propriety, slid through with her breath tethered, finding a room knee-deep in boxes strapped with fraying twine and initials burnt into cedar, the dust moving in the light like a slow snowfall that forgot it should be cold. And on a table under a cracked skylight lay a bundle of photographs in a silver tray, the topmost image showing a baby with a crescent star birthmark on the left shoulder, a mark that memory traced on her palm before thought dared to name it, while a tiny medal on a chain gleamed in the corner of the frame like a bell rung underwater, the same design she had bought from a street peddler the week before the orphanage fire, and her pulse miscounted the seconds as if the clock in the vestibule had skipped a beat, because the past had leaned forward and whispered her name. She clasped the photograph with fingers that tried and failed to pretend calm, walking the long spine of the manor where tapestries breathed and chandeliers listened, until the great gallery opened like a theater and Margaret Harrington stood alone among ancestral faces, the matriarch's posture carved from etiquette and endurance, while eyes prowled the frames for a grandson lost to time. And Elena stopped 3 paces away as the floor seemed to tilt toward a truth that would not wait. The silver chain in the picture biting her thumb through the paper as if insisting on witness, and the hush wrapped both women in the same fragile fabric that separates prayer from confession, while somewhere a hidden piano string hummed with the weight of unsaid names, and the air between them tasted of lemon polish and the faint iron of approaching tears, as Margaret's gaze lowered to the photograph and flinched like a swimmer touching cold water, recognition rising and retreating with the tide of disbelief in a single startled breath. And Elena felt the orphanage siren begin again in her chest, louder now that the house had heard it, because some answers arrive only when the world is rich enough to pay attention, and the image trembled between their hands the way a bridge trembles before someone crosses, just as footsteps approached from the corridor, and the frame slipped, and neither woman let go. The silver frame struck the marble floor with a sound too delicate for its weight, a faint crack blooming across the glass like a frozen river finding its direction. While Margaret Harrington's breath snagged mid-chest, the air around her fracturing into the silence that follows an earthquake nobody else heard, and Elena bent to rescue the picture though her knees felt carved from wax, her reflection flickering in the shards, servant and ghost staring back at each other, until the dust in the beam of light swirled into motion, revealing motes that danced like memories refusing to settle, and Margaret's eyes followed the movement with a dread too rehearsed to be new. Because the child in that photograph was both hers and not hers, both alive and gone, a paradox stitched into the family's oldest wound. The scent of polish and roses thickened, as if the house itself exhaled to steady its pulse. Margaret stepped backward, one hand pressing the pearl at her throat as though truth could be fastened shut, the other trembling toward the fallen frame that Elena already held close, their fingertips brushing once, just enough for the older woman to feel the heat of conviction and the younger to sense the frost of denial, and between them stretched the terrible intimacy of women who have both buried children in different ways. "Where did you find this?" Margaret's voice broke like lace tearing, and Elena, still clutching the picture, answered without realizing she had spoken. "In the attic, behind the cedar trunks. He has the mark, the star." The name Daniel hovered on her tongue, but refused to cross her lips. Speaking it would collapse the years that barely held her upright. The hallway clock chimed once, a reminder that time still existed, though neither woman believed it. And through the open door, a young man's voice drifted up from below, warm, certain, alive, asking whether Mrs. Harrington required anything else before he left. Margaret froze. Her eyes widened toward the sound that the other woman recognized without understanding, a tone that struck through her ribs like music she'd once sung to a cradle. For a breath too long they both stood captive to it, as the echo of that voice climbed the stairs, each syllable carrying the weight of what they did not yet dare to know, until Margaret whispered, barely audible, "That can't be him." And Elena whispered back, "Then who is it?" The voice carried up the staircase like sunlight spilling through fog, warm, patient, unaware of the ruins it was about to uncover. Daniel Harrington appeared at the landing, his suit jacket unbuttoned, blueprints tucked under one arm, unaware that two women below waited on the verge of collapse. His smile, courteous and unguarded, drew a tremor through the air heavier than any secret. The resemblance between him and the baby in the photograph was not a matter of chance. It was the echo of something stolen from time itself. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound followed. Her eyes drank in the shape of his jaw, the small curve at the corner of his mouth she had once traced with motherly devotion on another child, one she was told had died. Elena's breath tangled in her throat as Daniel descended, his footsteps landing in rhythm with her pulse. She searched his face, every blink, every tilt of his head, as if studying a language she once knew fluently but had forgotten how to speak. Beneath the polite tone in which he greeted her, she heard faint notes of laughter she remembered from nights in the orphanage when the blackout candles burned too low, and she would hum to keep fear away. Now that same timbre belonged to a man of means, a man with no memory of the woman who once stitched patches on his blanket. Her hands trembled around the frame, unwilling to let go or raise it. Margaret, desperate to maintain composure, gestured sharply for Daniel to leave, but he lingered, sensing a storm in the quiet. The silence stretched until it trembled. Daniel frowned, setting his blueprints on a side table. "Mother, is something wrong?" he asked, the word mother slicing through the still air like an accusation and a prayer all at once. Elena staggered at the sound. It didn't belong to her, yet it resonated as if her own blood had spoken. Margaret turned away, gripping the mantle with white knuckles, and her voice came out in fragments. "Nothing, dear. Just a memory I thought I'd buried." But her eyes flicked toward Elena with something dangerously close to confession. The young man waited for an explanation that would not come, while the photograph pressed against Elena's palm like a heartbeat. Somewhere deep in the manor, a door slammed on its own, and both women knew it wasn't the wind. The heavy door that had slammed sent a ripple through the house, shaking dust from chandeliers and loosening memories that had slept too long in silence. Daniel turned toward the echo, but Margaret stopped him with a single look, composed on the surface, panicked underneath. "It's only the wind," she said, though even the curtains hung still. Elena felt her chest constrict. The photograph pulsed against her ribs like something alive, its secret begging to breathe. She stepped closer to the window, pretending to straighten the drapes, and caught sight of her own reflection beside Daniel's. For a fleeting instant, their faces aligned, two versions of the same history rewritten by power. Her eyes watered at the resemblance, and she turned away before the truth could escape her in sound. Margaret crossed the room with deliberate grace, gathering the broken glass from the floor, her composure stitched together with decades of etiquette. "You've done enough for today," she murmured to Elena, voice trembling under the weight of command. "Leave the cleaning to someone else." It was dismissal disguised as kindness, the same tone used to bury scandals before they had a chance to grow teeth. But Elena didn't move. Her silence was not obedience. It was defiance wrapped in humility. The older woman's composure cracked, just a flicker, when their eyes met. Margaret recognized something unyielding there. The look of a mother who had already lost everything once, and would not lose it again. Daniel, unaware of the invisible battle, picked up the blueprint tube and turned toward the exit. "I'll send the restoration team tomorrow morning," he said. "Perhaps the attic should stay closed until then." The mention of the attic jolted Elena's memory, a chain of images flashing behind her eyes. The smell of burnt wood, the sound of children crying through smoke, the last sight of a tiny hand reaching for her before the flames swallowed his name. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the curtain to steady herself. Margaret noticed, fear tightening her posture. "Go home, Elena," she said more sharply. But Elena's voice, low and cracked, answered, "I've already been home once today." The words hung between them like thunder waiting for the strike, and neither woman could pretend not to understand what storm was coming. Night fell over Harrington Manor like a velvet curtain, muting the gold of its chandeliers into dim halos that trembled on the walls. Margaret dismissed the staff early, claiming fatigue, but her steps echoed restless patterns through the marble halls. In her study, the air smelled of old tobacco and forgotten roses. She poured herself a drink she would not touch, her hands too unsteady to lift the glass. On the desk lay a locked drawer she had not opened in years, a drawer containing the letter that began it all. The paper had browned at the edges, still carrying the faint scorch from the fire that had killed a child 2 decades earlier. Her late husband's handwriting slashed across it. The adoption must remain buried. No one can ever trace the child's origin. She pressed the letter flat, her pulse drumming louder than the storm outside. In another corner of the manor, Elena sat in the small cleaning quarters, staring at her worn hands. The night pressed against the window, and the reflection of lightning flashed across her eyes. She couldn't erase Daniel's face from her mind, the tilt of his smile, the birthmark beneath his collar she had glimpsed when he adjusted his tie. She whispered his name as if afraid to break it. From her pocket, she drew a half-burnt medallion identical to the one in the photo. The metal was cold, but holding it felt like touching memory itself. Every instinct urged her to run, to leave this place before the truth devoured her. Yet something deeper, older, whispered that destiny had led her here not for revenge, but for revelation. Margaret stared into the fireplace, the letter trembling between her fingers. She wanted to burn it again, to let the flames consume the lie one last time. But when the fire rose, her reflection in the glass shifted. Behind her, in the faint mirror of the mantel, she thought she saw a woman's silhouette watching. She turned, but no one stood there. Only the faint echo of Elena's footsteps retreating down the servants' hall and the distant hum of Daniel's car starting outside. Margaret crushed the letter into her fist, the paper biting her palm like guilt with teeth. She whispered into the empty room, "He can never know." Yet the storm outside answered with a single flash of lightning that illuminated the attic window. And there, for an instant, something moved in the shadows, as if the house itself had remembered. The next morning rose gray and brittle, sunlight struggling to pierce the mist that wrapped Harrington Manor like gauze around an old wound. Elena arrived early, though she hadn't slept. Her eyes carried the hollow shine of a woman who'd spent the night arguing with ghosts. The house greeted her with a silence that felt expectant, as if holding its breath for what she might uncover next. Passing through the corridor toward the west wing, she noticed the attic door, the one Margaret had ordered sealed, slightly ajar, a ribbon of light tracing the floorboards. Her pulse stumbled. She remembered closing it herself. Slowly, she climbed the stairs, each step creaking under the weight of secrets too long postponed. Dust danced in the morning beam like tiny embers refusing to die. The air smelled of cedar and smoke, the same scent that haunted her dreams. Boxes lay open now, as if someone else had searched through them during the night. On the desk where she had found the photograph rested a silver lighter, engraved with the initials EH, and a burnt corner of a document she could barely read. Orphanage Records, 2005. Her hands shook. She recognized the handwriting scrawled at the bottom. Her own signature from the day she'd filled out the admission form for her son, back when hope was still something she could afford. She pressed the paper to her chest, and the room tilted, memory overlapping with the present like a film out of sync. Behind her, a voice cut through the dust. "What are you doing up here?" It was Daniel. He stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, concern softening his tone. She spun around too quickly, the document slipping from her fingers and fluttering to the floor between them. He bent to pick it up, his eyes scanning the burnt words, curiosity sharpening into something else. Confusion, maybe recognition. "Why does this have your name?" he asked quietly. Elena's lips parted, but the truth refused to form. She looked at the medallion glinting at his neck, her medallion, and the room spun faster. "Because," she whispered, barely audible over the creak of the rafters, "you were never meant to disappear." Daniel frowned, stepping closer, but before she could speak again, footsteps thundered up the stairs, Margaret's voice slicing through the air. "Daniel, step away from her." Margaret's figure filled the doorway like a storm about to break, her silk robe flowing behind her as though the wind itself obeyed her grief. Daniel froze, the document still in his hand. Elena straightened, clutching the edge of the desk to steady herself. For a moment, all three stood caught in a silence too heavy to belong to morning. "Give me that," Margaret ordered, her voice trembling at the edges but still carrying the command of someone long accustomed to being obeyed. Daniel didn't move. His gaze flicked from his mother's face to the woman beside the desk, the maid whose eyes shimmered with something too familiar to be fear. "What is this?" he asked. "Why does her name appear on an orphanage record with mine?" Margaret's lips pressed together until they lost all color. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like small, precise verdicts. "It's nothing but a clerical error," she lied. though the words stumbled from her tongue like strangers in an unfamiliar house. Daniel's confusion deepened, his brows knitting as he looked back at Elena. "A clerical error doesn't smell like smoke," he said quietly. The remark cut through her, not because it accused, but because it recognized, as though his body remembered the fire even if his mind did not. Margaret reached for the document, but Elena stepped between them, her posture trembling yet unbroken. "You've hidden enough," she said, her voice soft but carrying the conviction of prayer. The older woman's hand faltered midair, then dropped to her side. Her eyes glistened, not with surrender, but with the exhaustion of someone defending an empire built on borrowed children. "You don't understand," she whispered to her son. "We saved you from nothingness." Daniel's face hardened. "You stole me from someone," he answered, his voice barely above a breath. Margaret's shoulders collapsed under the truth she could no longer carry. She turned away, pressing a hand to her temple as though the memory itself were a wound reopening. Elena reached into her apron and drew out the half-burnt medallion, holding it toward Daniel with trembling hands. "If this means nothing to you," she said, "throw it away." The metal gleamed between them like a verdict, and Daniel didn't move. The medallion lay in Daniel's palm, its surface catching the thin light that filtered through the attic window. He turned it slowly, the engraving on the back nearly worn smooth by time, yet familiar, as if his fingertips had traced it once in another life. "I used to dream about this," he murmured, eyes distant. "A silver light in the dark. I thought it was nothing." Elena's breath hitched. Tears welled, but did not fall. The silence between them thickened until Margaret broke it, her voice low, ragged. "You were never meant to find that, Daniel." The words hung heavy, both confession and plea. He looked at her, something cold dawning behind his eyes. "Then what else wasn't I meant to find?" Margaret sank into the old armchair by the desk, its legs protesting under the sudden weight of guilt. The storm she'd held back for 2 decades surged through her voice. "You were adopted through channels that no longer exist. It was complicated. Your father insisted it be quiet. There was a fire at the orphanage, and we were told no one survived." Her hands trembled in her lap, her pearls rattling softly. "But when they found you, burned but breathing, I couldn't let you vanish again. I told myself it was fate." The rationalization shattered as soon as it left her lips. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You told yourself it was mercy," he said. "But mercy doesn't erase a mother." Elena stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the medallion in his hand. "They told me you died that night," she whispered. "I searched for years, but there was nothing left. No records, no graves, just ashes. I prayed that if you were alive, someone would love you." Her voice cracked on the last word. Daniel looked between them, his world folding in on itself. The house groaned with the weight of revelation, beams settling like sighs. Outside, thunder rolled, the sound of reckoning arriving late but certain. He closed his fist around the medallion, eyes glistening. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "it's time to stop loving in secret." Margaret looked up, fear widening her pupils. "You don't know what this family can destroy," she warned. But Daniel only replied, "Maybe it's time someone rebuilt it." The storm outside thickened until rain struck the windows like impatient fingers demanding entry. Inside, Daniel paced the length of the attic, his shoes leaving tracks in the dust of forgotten decades. Each step seemed to tighten the air, as if the house itself held its breath for what he would do next. "All these years," he said softly, "you looked me in the eyes and never told me who I was." Margaret's voice trembled when she tried to answer, but her excuses collapsed under the gravity of her son's gaze. "You were safe," she said. "You had everything you needed." Daniel stopped, turning toward her. Everything but the truth. The words landed like thunder between them. Elena stood near the window, rain streaking down the glass beside her reflection, her heart caught between sorrow and relief. Margaret rose slowly, every motion deliberate, the dignity she'd worn like armor now cracking at the seams. "You don't understand what it was like back then," she said. "Your father." She stopped herself, pressing a hand to her chest as though the memory could be contained there. "He made choices to protect the family name. I followed them because I thought love could justify the lie." The confession fell from her lips like shards of porcelain. Daniel looked away, the weight of lineage and betrayal pressing against his ribs. "Love doesn't bury the living," he said. The remark sliced through Margaret's composure, and for the first time, she appeared smaller, not the matriarch of a dynasty, but a mother who had built her empire atop silence. Lightning flared through the window, illuminating Elena's tear-streaked face. She stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Sometimes the truth burns everything before it heals," she said softly. He nodded, unable to speak, the medallion still clenched in his fist. Margaret's eyes followed it, that small, merciless piece of silver that had undone a lifetime of deceit. The thunder rolled again, closer this time, shaking the rafters. Somewhere below, a door slammed, the old house protesting under the pressure of revelation. Margaret flinched, her voice rising into the chaos. "Do you think the world will forgive us?" she asked. Daniel turned toward her, his face half in shadow. "It's not the world you should be asking forgiveness from." And as the lightning flashed once more, the fire in the hearth downstairs roared to life, though no one had lit it. The blaze in the hearth downstairs roared higher than any natural flame, its glow spilling through the cracks of the floorboards, painting the walls of the attic with a trembling orange pulse. Daniel was the first to notice the scent, not wood, but paper. He rushed down the stairs, the other two following close behind. In the study, the firebox devoured a small pile of documents, the last embers of a secret fighting to vanish. Margaret froze at the threshold, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," she whispered, recognizing the curled edge of her husband's handwriting among the ashes. Elena stepped forward, her apron catching sparks that fizzled harmlessly. The house, it seemed, refused to burn her twice. Daniel grabbed the fire poker and pulled the remnants free, scattering them onto the carpet before the flames could finish their task. Blackened scraps fluttered like dying moths. On one half-charred page, he made out the heading, "Adoption Authorization, Orphanage Number 47. Beneath it, in smudged ink, were two signatures, Charles Harrington and Elena Vasquez. His heart clenched. Margaret swayed, gripping the doorframe to keep herself upright. "He told me it was destroyed," she murmured, voice breaking. "He promised me there'd be no record." The revelation twisted her grief into something raw and human. Daniel crouched, brushing soot from the paper as though clearing dust from a gravestone. "He didn't destroy it," he said. "He only hid it where guilt couldn't follow." The fire popped behind them, casting shadows that shivered like ghosts overhearing their own story. Elena knelt beside him, her hand hesitating over the remains. "He wanted you erased," she said quietly, "but the truth doesn't burn that easily." Her words carried the strength of all the years she'd lived in silence. Daniel looked up at her, the weight of belonging dawning like a slow sunrise, beautiful and unbearable. Margaret turned away, pressing her forehead to the wall, whispering prayers that no longer fit the faith they once belonged to. "If the world finds out," she said, "everything your father built will fall." Daniel stood, holding the scorched document by its corner. "Then let it fall," he answered. Because maybe the only thing worth saving is what he tried to destroy. A gust of wind burst through the chimney, scattering the ashes into the air, and among the fragments, one intact line glowed faintly in the firelight. Child transferred under false pretenses. The words floated up, caught in the draft, and vanished, but not before they were seen. When the last ember died, the manor fell into a hush so deep it felt like the house itself was grieving. Daniel stood near the hearth, the scorched document trembling in his hand, the words etched into his mind like burns that would never fade. He looked at Margaret, who sat motionless in the armchair, her pearls broken, beads scattered across the carpet like tiny echoes of collapse. "How long were you going to let me live a lie?" he asked, not shouting, only tired, as if fury had given way to exhaustion. Margaret lifted her head slowly, her eyes glazed with the fragility of someone who has finally run out of excuses. "Until it stopped hurting," she said. But it never did. The honesty, small as it was, felt heavier than all her lies combined. Elena lingered near the doorway, afraid to intrude on a pain that was both hers and not hers. The photograph, still tucked into her apron pocket, pressed against her side like a heartbeat out of rhythm. She thought of the years spent in silence, scrubbing strangers' floors while imagining her son somewhere far away, living a life untouched by poverty or smoke. Now that he stood before her, whole and alive, she could barely breathe beneath the weight of what she had wished for. The world had granted her prayer, but rewritten it in cruelty's handwriting. She moved closer, each step deliberate, as if crossing a bridge that might vanish once she reached the other side. Margaret's voice quivered when she spoke again. "He was mine too," she whispered. "When we took him in, I thought love could erase the past. I was wrong." Her confession fell into the silence like a cracked bell. Daniel turned toward Elena, the truth no longer something he needed to prove. It simply was, vast and irreversible. The medallion glinted between his fingers, half silver, half shadow. "If blood makes a family," he said quietly, "then love must be the part that keeps it alive." His mother, both of them, watched him, one with remorse, one with awe. Outside, thunder rolled away into the hills, leaving behind only rain, steady, cleansing, relentless. Daniel looked toward the window, his reflection split by the glass. "This house was built on lies," he said. "It's time we see what's left when they're gone." And somewhere deep within the walls, the old clock began to tick again. The clock's renewed ticking spread through the halls like a heartbeat rediscovered, steady but unsettling. Margaret rose from the chair, her face pale beneath the chandelier's fading light. "Daniel," she said softly, "you don't understand what this truth will cost. The Harrington name is more than wealth, it's survival. The press will shred us, the board will revolt. Your father's empire." She stopped mid-sentence, her breath catching as if even the walls refused to hear his name. Daniel met her gaze, calm but resolute. "Then let them," he said. "An empire built on a stolen child deserves to burn." The words struck her harder than any shout, the kind of honesty that stripped even pride of its armor. Margaret sank back, trembling, as though the air itself had turned against her. Elena stepped closer, torn between empathy and fury. "You talk about empires," she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. "But all I ever wanted was my son. You raised him in marble halls while I searched through ashes. I begged priests, nurses, anyone who might have seen him. Every door closed, everyone paid to forget." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "You don't know what it's like to bury hope every morning just to survive the day." Margaret flinched. Shame colored her cheeks like bruises that no hand had touched. "You think I didn't love him?" she whispered. "I loved him more than my own life." Elena's answer came quietly, but it carried the weight of eternity. Then you should have loved the truth more. Daniel stood between them, caught in the gravitational pull of two lives that could no longer exist apart. The rain outside had softened into mist, yet the storm within the manor refused to calm. He turned toward the staircase, the air heavy with decisions that could not be undone. "No one's leaving this house until we face everything," he said. His voice was not loud, but it silenced both women instantly. From the hallway, the butler appeared, hesitant. "Sir," he murmured, "there's someone at the gate asking for you." Daniel frowned. "At this hour?" "A woman," the butler continued. "She says she has something that belongs to you." Daniel exchanged a wary glance with Elena and started toward the door. Behind him, Margaret's whisper barely rose above the ticking clock. "Be careful, my son. The past has a way of arriving dressed as mercy." The night had deepened into a velvet hush when Daniel reached the front door. Beyond the rain-specked glass, a figure stood under the wrought iron gate's lantern, its flickering glow bending around her like the light feared to touch. The butler hesitated behind him, murmuring. She refused to give her name. Daniel pulled the door open, the cold air slicing through the heavy scent of wax and smoke that clung to the house. The woman outside lowered her hood, revealing silver hair slicked with rain and eyes sharp as truth itself. "You don't remember me," she said, her accent soft but deliberate. "But I remember the night they took you." Her name came to him from a corner of the burnt papers, Sister Miriam, the nurse who'd worked at the orphanage before it burned. Elena appeared behind Daniel, her gasp escaping before thought could stop it. "Sister Miriam?" she whispered, disbelief quivering in her voice. The nun nodded, raindrops tracing down her lined cheeks. "I thought you were dead," Elena said. "Almost," the woman replied, her gaze is shifting toward Daniel. "But someone wanted me gone before I could testify. Your husband's men," she added, eyes flicking toward Margaret, who had emerged from the hall's shadow. The name Charles Harrington seemed to hang between them like smoke refusing to disperse. Margaret's breath faltered. "He did it to protect the family," she said weakly, but even she didn't believe it. Sister Miriam reached into her satchel and drew out a sealed envelope, edges browned by time. "Then he failed," she said, "because the truth doesn't die as easily as people do." Daniel took the envelope, his fingers tracing the faded seal, State of New York, Department of Orphan Welfare. He opened it with care, pulling out a single surviving record. His eyes skimmed the lines, every word dismantling another wall of the life he thought he knew. Child rescued from fire, identified as Daniel Vasquez, son of Elena Vasquez. Later transferred to private custody under name Daniel Harrington. Beneath the ink, a faint fingerprint, a child's, blurred where the paper had once been wet. He looked up, voice raw. "This is proof." Margaret's tears fell soundlessly, landing on the marble floor like confessions too late for forgiveness. Sister Miriam's voice broke the silence. "Proof," she said, "is only mercy if you choose to use it." And before anyone could reply, thunder rolled again, but this time, it wasn't from the sky. Somewhere deep within the manor, glass shattered. The sound came from the west corridor, sharp, final, unmistakable. Daniel spun toward it, the envelope still clutched in his hand. The lights flickered, shadows darting across the walls like frightened birds. Elena gasped and followed as he ran, Sister Miriam close behind despite her trembling knees. When they reached the gallery, shards of glass littered the marble floor like fallen stars. The great portrait of Charles Harrington, patriarch, founder, and architect of the lie, lay in ruins. The frame's gilt edges were splintered, the canvas slashed clean down the center. Wind howled through the broken window behind it, scattering bits of rain across his painted face. Margaret appeared last, breathless, her hand gripping the doorway for balance. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then she whispered. It's like he knew. Daniel knelt among the fragments, the edges biting his palms. He didn't care. Beneath the wreckage lay a thin metal box, hidden inside the hollow of the wall. Its lock had rusted, but yielded easily to a blow from the poker he'd grabbed. Inside were papers, dozens of them, each one stamped and sealed with falsified names, altered dates, erased lives. He did this to others, Daniel said, his voice breaking. It wasn't just me. Elena stared, horror flooding her features. He sold them, she murmured. Children who had no one to protect them. Margaret's knees gave way. She sank to the floor, tears streaking her powdered cheeks. I didn't know, she whispered, though the tremor in her tone confessed that perhaps she had chosen not to. Sister Miriam closed her eyes and crossed herself, the rain outside intensifying into a relentless percussion. God keeps ledgers we can't erase, she said. Daniel gathered the papers in his arms as if they were bodies salvaged from the fire. These go to the authorities, he said. No more secrets. Margaret reached for him weakly. You'll destroy everything your father built. He turned toward her, lightning reflecting in his eyes. He destroyed it himself, he answered. The wind ripped through the shattered window, scattering the documents across the floor. One landed at Margaret's feet, a certificate bearing the name of a child she'd once sponsored in charity. Her lips parted, trembling. Oh, God, she whispered, clutching the paper to her chest. Her too. But before she could finish, another crash echoed from upstairs, the attic door slamming open on its own, as if the house itself demanded the final truth. The group ascended the staircase as the wind surged through the open corridors, candles extinguishing one by one, their smoke curling into whispers that clung to the ceiling beams. The attic door banged again, louder this time, as if insisting on its right to be heard. Daniel reached it first, his shirt damp from rain and sweat, his pulse thrumming in his throat. He pushed the door wide and the room greeted him with a gust of cold air that smelled of cedar, dust, and something faintly metallic, the scent of time bleeding through memory. Inside, the boxes had been overturned, the papers scattered like snowdrifts of forgotten names. At the center, the old cedar chest where Elena had found the photograph now stood open, its lid cracked but not broken, the hinge squealing as it swayed. Margaret entered behind him, her steps unsteady, one hand pressed against her heart. Sister Miriam lingered at the threshold, clutching her rosary, her eyes wary of the ghost's memory conjures when truth runs thin. Elena crossed the room slowly, drawn to the chest as if magnetized by the weight of unfinished stories. Inside, beneath yellowed linens, lay another envelope sealed in red wax. Daniel took it carefully, breaking the seal, and unfolded the brittle parchment within. It was a confession, Charles Harrington's final letter, never mailed. To whoever finds this, I fear judgment more than God. The child was not mine to keep, but without him, my legacy was hollow. Forgive me, though I cannot forgive myself. The ink trailed off into a blot of remorse. Margaret covered her mouth with her hand, her body shaking as though struck by invisible thunder. Daniel lowered the letter, his gaze finding Elena through the dimness. It's over, he said, but his voice carried the ache of someone who knew that ending and healing were never the same thing. Elena stepped forward, her trembling hands reaching for his face, touching him with the reverence of a mother relearning her child's skin. No, she whispered, it's only beginning. Sister Miriam turned toward the broken window. Dawn had begun to bloom at the edge of the horizon, a faint silver light creeping into the attic. Margaret sank to her knees beside the chest, whispering prayers through trembling lips. The first rays of morning struck the photograph still resting on the desk. The baby, the medallion, the faint birthmark, all illuminated in the pale light of truth. And then, from somewhere deep within the manor, the old clock struck once more, not midnight, but morning. Weeks later, Harrington Manor stood quieter than ever, its echo softened, its ghosts at rest. Reporters had come and gone. Headlines had printed and faded. The scandal that once threatened to devour the family name now lived only as a quiet testament to what truth could rebuild. The orphanage records were delivered to the authorities, and the hidden adoptions were traced to new families seeking closure. In the West Wing, the gallery walls were stripped bare, the portraits of power replaced with photographs of the children the Harrington Foundation now sponsored. Daniel had renamed it the Vasquez Home for the Forgotten, and beneath its crest he engraved a single phrase: "Love remembers what lies forget." Margaret lived in the smaller cottage behind the estate now, her days spent tending a modest garden where roses and wild ivy grew together, tangled but alive. The woman who once defined love through control now found peace in surrender. Each afternoon, she wrote letters, not to explain, but to thank. She never sent them. She didn't need to. Her repentance lived in action, and every week, without fail, she walked to the hill overlooking the new orphanage and left a bouquet of white lilies, whispering a name that had once been stolen from her lips. Sister Miriam often met her there, her laughter surprisingly light for a woman who had survived both fire and silence. Together, they prayed not for forgiveness, but for gratitude that the truth had chosen to survive them. Inside the restored manor, sunlight fell across the grand hall where Elena polished the last piece of silver before hanging up her apron for the final time. Daniel entered quietly, sleeves rolled, his medallion glinting in the light. "You don't have to keep working," he told her. She smiled faintly. "I'm not working," she said. "I'm finishing." He nodded, placing a framed photograph on the mantel, the same one she had found years ago, now restored, no longer hidden. It showed a baby smiling between two women, one who had birthed him and one who had raised him. Beneath it, a brass plate read, "Family is not found in blood, but in the courage to tell the truth." As the clock chimed the hour, the wind slipped through the open doors, carrying the scent of rain and cedar and the house, after so many years of holding its breath, finally exhaled. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so more people can discover that even the smallest act of courage can change the world. Write in the comments, "I believe in the power of courage." Together, let's keep spreading stories that transform lives and prove that hope can rise from the most unexpected voices. Thank you so much for your support.